Hello, and thank you for joining us for the first episode of a podcast series presented by the Los Angeles Violoncello Society. For those of you who are not familiar with LAVS, we are a Los Angeles-based cello society whose mission is to promote and enrich the art of cello playing. This year, LAVS is going to continue presenting a series of masterclasses and will feature some of the most prominent artists of our generation. My name is Vardan Gasparyan, and today joining me is Principal Cellist of the LA Opera, a founding member of the Pacific Trio, a recording artist, an educator, and my dear friend, John Walz. Hi, John.
Hi, Vardan. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I guess the first question I have for you is one of those questions that we as musicians get asked very often when we tell a stranger that, we're a musician and we play the cello. And the first question that pops into someone's head is to wonder, how did we become a professional musician, and why the cello?
Well, my mother was a wonderful musician. She was a very good pianist and talented songwriter and a music educator. In fact, she was in the San Marino schools, she was the one who taught all the classroom music for several decades. And my father was a football coach. But when I was 7 years old, my mother accompanied a cellist on Brooks Kol Nidre.
Wow.
And I remember sitting on the floor listening to them rehearse. And I just fell in love with the sound of the cello. And I told my parents, that's what I want to play. And so I started cello when I was 9 years old in the LA schools. Mm-hmm. Took cello in schools for a couple of years. And then when we moved to Pasadena, my father asked a friend of his who was the superintendent of music for the Los Angeles City Schools, who's a good cello teacher in Pasadena, and he said, you should try Eleanor Schoenfeld. He said, I don't think she takes beginners, but call her anyway. Wow. But because my father knew this gentleman, she agreed to hear me and accepted me as a student, and so I was a student of Eleanor's
first teacher.
My first teacher.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
And then from there, I was even luckier to move to Switzerland to study with the great Pierre Fournier.
Absolutely.
So those were my two teachers.
So you actually studied with Eleanor for how long?
Well, from the time I was 11 until I was about 19 or 20.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Tell me about your journey to Switzerland and studying with one of the greatest cellists of all time, Pierre Fournier. Please.
Well, one night I will never, ever forget was, I believe it was 1967, which would have made me 14. And I remember early one morning, I believe it was a Thursday morning or maybe a Friday, no, I think it was a Friday morning. The phone rang about 7 a.m. and it was Eleanor, and she called my parents and said, you must take John to hear the Los Angeles Philharmonic tonight. She said, Pierre Fournier is playing the Dvorak Concerto with Zubin Mehta and the LA Phil. She goes, you must take John tonight. So my father, who at the time worked at the for the LA City Schools, and the Board of Education was literally across the street from the Chandler. So he went over on his lunch hour and got tickets for us. And we went that night. And it was a night that changed my life forever. In fact, my cellist friends in Los Angeles, who I've known, since childhood, still talk about those concerts. Wow. How legendary they were. And I mean, I just sat there with my mouth open, having never heard such beauty and nobility of playing. And the other fascinating thing was the Philharmonic had recently acquired the General Kid Stradivari, which of course they acquired for whoever is principal of the Phil. And so Kurt Rare, who was the principal cello at the time, loaned it to Fournier for those concerts. And of course, that is the cello that Leo Stern played the premiere of the Dvorak Concerto on. So, yeah.
That's so cool.
But yeah, and then fast forward just a few years, when I had started USC, because Eleanor taught there, and she told my parents I had to go to USC, and as great a music school as it is, it was not the right school for me, for a number of reasons. But so I didn't last there very long, but I wrote to Fournier because I'd always wanted to study with him, and of course this was back in the very early 70s. This was before the internet, before email. You had to actually write a letter and mail it, So I got his address and I wrote to him and I said, Maestro Fournier, I would just love to have a chance to meet you and perhaps study with you. So he said, well, I'm coming to play with the Phoenix Symphony. And he gave me the dates. He told me what hotel he was staying in. So I went and met him in Phoenix, Arizona. Wow. And that
was your first time actually meeting him?
It was. And I will never forget, because I stayed at the same hotel. I remember we had a Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning, something appointment. I remember knocking on his hotel door. He opened the door and here was this man who had been the face on all those famous Deutsche Grammophon records that I'd had since I was a child. And it was just the most, amazing thing. He spent 2 hours with me. I remember I played first movement Haydn D and first movement Dvorak. And he was so kind and so helpful. We had this incredibly long, really detailed lesson. And he was so kind. He liked my playing and he arranged for me to come and study with him. So the following year I moved to Switzerland, and so I lived in Switzerland for about 2 years studying with him. So that was 73, 74, and then I spent the summers of 76, 78, and 1980 with him as well. So,
wow.
Yeah.
What's your favorite memory of Fournier, or something that he told you that has stuck with you for all these years?
One of the things that I've told this story so often, especially to my own students. I remember the first thing I played for him in my first course of study with him once I moved to Switzerland was in his summer master classes in Zurich. And I remember I was very nervous because first of all, I'd never been to Europe before. I'd never played in a public master class before. I was, a boy from Pasadena I was a fish out of water and doing, all these new experiences, and I was playing for my idol. I was so nervous. And like an idiot, I tried to play the Schumann concerto, And so I remember I got through opening page, and he stopped me and goes, "Go back to the beginning and play without any vibrato." So I started again, and I was playing it without vibrato, and of course it just sounded horrible, and I was practically in tears. And then luckily he didn't let me suffer very long, but he stopped me, and then he tapped his bow and had the pianist start. He played the whole opening page for us, basically without any vibrato, but it still sounded just like him. And as I'm sitting there watching him, my eyes just went right down to his right hand, and I realized, this light bulb just went bing. I realized how incredibly inadequate my right hand was. That I was, like so many people, was just trying to cover up everything with vibrato instead of creating the sostenuto, the sound from letting it generate from the right hand. And of course that's one of the things that he worked on so much with me in the years I studied with him.
The right hand.
Yeah. Oh, and the other thing that I always remember also in his classes, because he spoke, obviously French was his native language, but also he spoke beautiful English and German. And no matter what language he was speaking in class, elasticity, that word was common to all three languages.
John, we have to talk about your love for opera. First, tell me, how did you get into playing at the LA Opera? And was it actually driven by your passion towards opera?
I mean, ever since I was a child, I've had a love of opera because I just love singing. I remember, again, one of my great memories was when I was 10 years old. It was spring of 1964. My family went to New York for, well, now we would call it spring break. Then it was called Easter vacation. But I remember my mother had never been to New York City, and she wanted to go, and we all went and saw the sights, the Empire State Building, and it was really exciting. But the thing I remember most was my mother took my two sisters and me to see the Magic Flute. And this was at the old Met down on, I think it was 33rd and Broadway. It was before Lincoln Center was built. So the old opera house doesn't exist anymore. But I remember, I still have the program, and I blown away by it. And I still remember the cast. Cesare Siepi was Sarastro, Roberta Peters was the Queen of the Night. I mean, phenomenal cast. And I just, I was just amazed by it. And so I've always loved, beautiful singing, and of course, as we know, and I think one of the things that, as cellists, for all of us, that attracted us to the instrument is that it is the instrument that is the closest to the human voice. And so, I've always listened to singers to help with legato and expression and vibrato and so I always tried to have a vocal approach to my playing, and then when the opportunity came to play with the LA Opera, and it was a natural fit.
Which was when, by the way?
I've been playing with the opera since 92, I believe it was. So it's been over 30 years. And it's also nice because it's not a full-time job. I never wanted a full-time orchestra job because I always wanted to be able to travel with the Pacific Trio and do solo concerts and I always wanted, and with the opera being a part-time job, it was a nice
Give you
fit.
the freedom
Yeah.
to do. Yeah. My next question is also probably not the easiest, but I was wondering if you can think of the highlight of your career.
I would say if I had to pick one thing, it would probably be in 1997 when I had a chance to perform the Dvorak in Prague with the Czech National Symphony, and then do the recording of it
Mm-hmm.
in the Rudolfinum in the Dvorak Hall. That was
The Dvorak.
there. You go. That was kind of a dream come true. Yeah.
That's great. And my last question, as someone who has practically done it all, played with orchestra, soloed, played recitals, played chamber music all over the world, recorded in the studios for some major movie soundtracks. What is your one advice to musicians who are still in school and are trying to navigate the next step in their career?
Be versatile. When I was in school, basically, if you were a good player, you were pretty much guaranteed you could go out and take a few auditions and get a job. That reality does not exist anymore. There are way too many musicians and too few jobs. So every young musician has to sort of create his own or her own niche and place in the music world. That means you have to, people, they create a chamber music series for themselves, and of course you freelance and you teach and you put together a hodgepodge of many different musical endeavors, and that means also being able to play in many different styles. And you have to also be collegial, because you want people to like you and hire you, and you have to be dependable. And so
there's no one set formula of
nope.
Here's what you do after
Nope.
school, this leads you to success.
Yep. And people who think they're just going to say, well, I can play the Rococo variations better than anybody else, that doesn't mean much anymore. It really doesn't.
Right. Okay, I said the previous question was going to be the last question, but I just thought of another one. If you didn't become a musician, what would you do?
Well, I probably would have loved to have been a tennis player, though I don't think I have the talent for it. So, but anyway.
Great answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. See you next time.